was just thinking because, like, you know what? I believe that when God created the world itself, the earth was fully covered with green vegetation. Mm-hmm. There was no, maybe God did have deserts there. Maybe God had, like, I don't know, but I don't know. We will never know. But I believe that the earth was at one point covered in all green vegetation. And now the Bible passage that he did show at the end did show that I think there's actually another passage actually that does talk about Satan being the one who pretty much destroyed the earth, and he's like the one who brought down the earth basically down to the ground and stuff, right? Mm-hmm. So I do believe that there were huge there were huge trees and stuff like that at one point, just as there were giants, and many creatures I believe are even wiped out, which may have existed during the time of Adam and Eve. Mm-hmm. But as far as like those mountains, I do believe that those mountains are rocks, but that's my own, like, I believe that because like the Bible does talk about mountains and stuff, right? Mountains and rocks and stuff.
Oh,
because,
absolutely. It definitely talks about that. But what's really fascinating, what I found, you know, in just a little bit of research I've been doing, only hills are mentioned before the flood. No mountains are mentioned until after the flood. And a lot of scholarly, investigation shows that the mountains were formed with the flood. Even the sea level was lower, before the flood.
Oh, really?
Time. I mean, a change in the overall topography of the earth after the flood would also account for the waters of the flood. Yes. Exactly what's suggested in Psalms 104:8, right? The mountains rose, the valleys sunk down to the place which thou did establish for them. Right?
Oh!
In the context of verse 6 and 9, that must be referring to events of Noah's flood, right? But again in verse 9, right? Thou didst set a boundary that they may not pass over, that they may not return to cover the earth. This must refer to God's promise not to flood the entire earth again after Noah's flood, right? The Psalms exalts God's power in this awesome Psalms in verse 6 and 7, right? But again, when I was starting to look into it, like, for example, they were talking about, like, the different places around the earth, right? And they were talking about, canyons and stuff. And again, a lot of these things are explained through a very, very quick, water. Even the fossil record, finding actual intact fossils embedded into the sediment shows a very, very quick, rapid, and again, a worldwide flood accounts for this.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
That's the thing. That I agree with that, right? Mm-hmm. That's kind of what I've always kind of had in the back of my head. I believe that it was like the flood not only caused canyons to rise, but it pretty much destroyed all things. Because when God said that he was destroying the earth, he said he's destroying both men and beasts, and pretty much the earth itself, everything that he made. I believe, he pretty much brought all the glories of the earth before the flood. All of it was removed, taken away. Mm-hmm. Right, and that could also be as well, like every single, like all other trees and stuff that God had made, all big, gigantic. Because the entire earth itself, I believe it was all covered with water.
Oh, I agree.
Right.
And like what I said, when I was doing that investigation on like Psalms and getting in there, and when you get in 6 and 7, right, thou didst cover it with a deep as with a garment. The waters were standing above the mountains. At thy rebuke they fled. At the sound of thy thunder they hurried away. Thus, God simply rebuked the waters that covered the mountains, and they went to their established place as the mountains rose and the valley sank, right? But here's this is interesting. I picked this up in some investigation. This explains why the ocean basins are so deep and wide. Mountains higher than Mount Everest are found in the ocean. Somehow, a continental separation or a massive plate movement, the oceans were deepened and widened. Evidence such as the topography of continental shelves, the sea mounts, and the great submarine canyons indicate a former lower sea level before the flood. It is also considered that most of the Earth's surface now is covered by water, 70%. And if the entire Earth's surface were leveled out, the water of the ocean would cover the Earth to a depth of 1.7 miles. Therefore, if the mountains rose and the valley sank, the water of the flood would have ended up mainly in the oceans. Right? So, and this is interesting right here, too. The truth of Psalms 104 also explains why mountain ranges appear folded as if they rose. Perhaps a drastic collision of tectonic plates would have caused such an upthrusting, resulting in and further tectonic activity, volcano erosion, sedimentation, and fossilization, which is apparent in the geologic record. It is also important to consider that the geologic fact of fossils of fish on top of mountains. I have a water-dwelling, fossil that is found on the top of Atlas Mountain. Mount Everest itself contains fossils, and it's composed of water deposit layers, right? So, again, what's really fascinating, too, on these supposed, they're talking about stumps and they're talking about mountains, but what they're finding on the top of these mountains, though, are fossilized fish, right? How does fish get on top of the mountain? So, again, I think, from a biblical worldview, any way we're looking at any type of theory that's presented, we've always got to take it from a Bible standpoint, right? So I agree with you. I mean, what makes more sense? That, there was a whole whack of a civilization that went around and mined the whole earth and cut down all these big trees, right? Or, there was a worldwide flood that created kind of the anomalies. Right? So I find it incredibly fascinating. Like, don't get me wrong. I think there's some interesting truths maybe embedded in there in the sense that, of course we believe in giants, but really to the extent that that he's going and that everyone is kind of caught up. Everyone's jumping on this like crazy, and I think it's really cool to start looking at that. But he quotes scripture at the end, and that was my major thing. I'm like, okay, if you're going to quote scripture, let's be faithful to the entire Bible text here, right?
Yes.
How do we compile this? But I'm thinking a lot of these, and again, I haven't really researched a lot of the things that he brought out. The shapes and the forms, and they do look like tree stumps. I'll give them that, right? But again, when we see these abnormal things, I agree with what he's saying. I mean, I'm not going to use the swear words he used, but what I'm going to say is a lot of that stuff is garbage that the scientific community has given us over millions and billions of years. That can become, just nonsense.
The whole thing. You know what actually kind of tipped me off is when I went back to look. Even the whole thing about biological, decomposition, decomposites turning into oil and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Man, I feel like slapping some senses into these people now. Right? Because that's the biggest nonsense ever.
It is. Oh, yeah, it is. And that's where I think a lot of people are gravitating, because he's bringing up the absurdities and the lies of scientism. They have sold us a massive lie on everything. I mean, they're hiding the truth. Everyone agrees on that. They're hiding the truth. But when we get into the Bible, what is the truth? The truth is there was a worldwide flood, right?
Yeah.
You get into verses like I just quoted, and it talks about, and what I find very fascinating is mountains aren't even mentioned before the flood, right? Hills.
Yeah.
If you actually look in the Bible, only thing that is mentioned before the flood are hills.
Yes.
Mountains are afterwards, and mountains are mentioned all throughout Scripture. So, again, were they created, after the flood? What would happen within the flood? So I think for anyone investigating this, looking at different angles, what would happen, how would things form? How would fossilize, how would things completely fossilize intact instantly? Right? What scientists will tell you is it's a meteor, right, or something? They'll say just nonsense, or millions of years. And we know that's a lie. But again, biblically speaking, I think that's kind of where the investigation is.
What makes sense? When you were mentioning about how how you brought up about the Earth now is covered with 70% water. 70% water and only 30% of it is land. It makes perfect sense that at one time all the water level was not even where it's at. It was much lower, exposing most of the Earth itself as being more Earth. Right?
Yep.
And so that, and because the Bible does says, in Genesis, what did God say that he called the land? He called the land earth, and the waters he called seas. Right? So there were many seas, not like the vast oceans, right?
Correct.
And so when you think about it now, like a sea, we know that seas are like flowing fountains, right? Flowing fountains of waters. And that's what the Bible does describe a lot more of. And now, and after the flood, I believe it was after the flood that now the earth pretty much became limited as far as its resources and also its land mass, all of those things. And it makes also perfect sense when you think about it, because 30% of the land of the earth would bring the world's population up until today in this millennia, roughly 6,000 years. And now the earth is reaching its all-time high population to pretty much occupy the lands. When you think about it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. It's just me though. That's just me thinking. I'm like, because.
And I was looking up something just as far as like evidences on the earth for a global flood. And again, when you get into the creation ministries, I found this one. It was actually in children's curriculum, kind of teaching them the evidence to support this, right? But I found this really fascinating, right? They said, one, sea creatures buried on top of mountains, right? They said fossilized shellfish are found buried in the Himalayas to the highest mountain range in today's world that were formed during the flood, Psalms 104:8. How did these marine creatures get there? Our Bible verse tells us that at one time the whole earth, including the high hills of the pre-flood world, were underwater. So during the flood, the rock layers that formed in the Himalayas were laid down by water, and then later rose high mountains were formed from them, right? Here's number two. Billions of dead things buried in rock layers laid down by water all over the earth. Around the world, billions of different creatures were buried by the waters of the flood. In the Grand Canyon, we find a fossil graveyard where billions of squid-like noctioids were buried, and would take a lot of water to bury that many creatures. We also find land animals buried with sea creatures. In northern Tasmania, we find a toothed whale and a possum buried together. Whales and possums do not live in the same place. A powerful flood must have buried them together. We also find fossils that were buried very quickly. For example, a 6-foot-long Ichthyosaurus was fossilized when she was giving birth. All of these fossils pointed to the global flood as recorded in the Bible. Okay, number three, rock layers across continents. 2 rock layers in the Grand Canyon, the Tapeats sandstone and the Redwall limestone, can be traced across the whole United States and into Canada. Both layers can even be traced across the Atlantic Ocean. The Tapeats sandstones right across northern Africa into Israel, and the Redwall limestone into England and beyond. What possibly could have laid down so much sediment across a huge distance? Only a global flood is described in Genesis. Number 4, sediment transported long distances. The sand that makes up the Canoya sandstone layer of the spectacular Grand Canyon in Arizona came all the way from the northern U.S., the far eastern U.S. and Canada. What could pick up such a huge amount of sand and dump it so far away? A really big flood, just like one described in Genesis. Number 5, no erosion between rock layers. If the rock layers were really laid down slowly with millions of years between each layer, as many people think, the wind and water should have worn hills and valleys into the rocks. This process is called erosion and happens to rocks all over the world today. However, most rock layers show no evidence of such erosion between them. The layers fit together perfectly without any hills or valleys between them. The rock layers were not laid down slowly over millions of years. They were laid down quickly by the global flood. And then here's the last one here, I think. 6, bent, not broken rock layers. If you take soft Play-Doh and try to bend it, what happens? It bends, of course. What if you let that Play-Doh dry out? When you try to bend it again, what happens? It breaks. The same thing happens to rocks. Before they harden into solid rock, they are bendable, like soft Play-Doh. But when they get hard, you can't bend them anymore because they will just crack. In many places around the world, we see rock layers that are folded or bent without having been broken. This means the rocks would have been wet, soft like Play-Doh, when they were bent. If the rock layers were slowly laid down millions of years before they were bent, they would have already dried out and thus cracked instead of folding like they did. So these rock layers cannot be millions of years old. They were quickly laid down and bent during the years of the flood. All around the world, the rocks cry out that there has been a global flood. The history in the Bible is true. There really was a global flood that buried billions of dead things in rock layers, laid down by waters all of the earth, and changed the formation of what we know to be true of our reality. So,
there's evidence all over the world suggesting the pre-flood. Even maybe you saw the Noah's Ark found. Also, the ruins of Sodom and Gomorrah. It's all there. There are many historical and archaeological accounts that justify that the Bible is true, right? If all of these things are all falling in line with Scripture, I have to take it for what it is. The Bible is definitely the one that explains it, and it makes perfect sense now when I think about it. And I actually never thought about it. It makes perfect sense now thinking about how at one time all the sea level was actually much lower than what it is today. Yes. There could not have been oceans if the earth at one time was covered in green vegetation, which that's what I believe, right? And so now everything fits and makes sense that way. And
Even the trees, for that matter. Let's just go with the theory that there were massive trees. That still doesn't discount the Bible, because I agree with you that vegetation and things were a lot grander. Even animals might have been bigger. You're getting into dinosaurs. I mean, I believe that the atmospheric conditions were different before the flood, right?
Exactly.
And again, I know that, before, with the canopy theory, they'd say, with the ozone or whatever, it was keeping in gases and stuff. But even with the flat earth model, and again, specifically with the whole bathysphere, that there's water above us and water below us, right? If you remove water, from an enclosure, an enclosed creation, you change the, atmospheric conditions, right? You will have more oxygen or less oxygen. So again, it's still,
what's interesting?
Sorry?
You know what's interesting too, when you think about it? Trees provide oxygen.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So now, if trees provide oxygen, that means the bigger the trees that you have, the more oxygen you have, and which would also kind of translate to even like the how the what's it called, like currently in today's times in our biosphere, the clouds are roughly estimated to be at about 40,000 feet of altitude.
Correct.
So if we had, let's say, bigger trees, that means that the distance of where the clouds would be forming would kind of extend, and it would be up higher, right? If we had bigger trees, and so and all of these do affect the organisms and biological species, including life of animals and also human beings, which would ultimately also aid in determining how well the creatures will grow, whether they will be like let's say the same in stature as they were originally or not. All of this will be determined as well, because when you remove all of these things and you change the different atmospheric conditions, the creatures are going to grow differently.
Correct.
So it makes perfect sense also, because when you think about it in that aspect here, that is scientific argument also that does justify the pre-flood, or that before the flood things were different, and after the flood life changed and everything, and like humanity.
They actually even tested it. They've had like a chamber, I know, of fish, and they've included more oxygen in the chamber, and they've grown the fish even larger than normal, right? Like they know that if there was more oxygen or different atmospheric conditions, that yes, animals. And what I find always fascinating, getting into the dinosaur discussion, is that dinosaur basically, quote unquote, is like a lizard, right? But what's really interesting about all animals, lizards are the only animal that continually grow their entire lifespan. So, for example, we know in the Bible that men, lived to like Methuselah, and you got like Noah. I mean, they're living to 900 years, right? Lizards can live pretty long. But what happens if you were to kind of, give them 10 times their lifespan? Because again, a normal turtle can like live for like 100 years, or so let's just say they were living to 1,000 years, and they never stopped growing. How big would these lizards become, right? So again, it falls into the line that, hey, how come, the whole dinosaur thing, I mean, we know it's alive, but millions of years old. We know that, it was created, they were with man. Well, where did they go? But again, could they be still walking around? I mean, they have like some of the things I think are really, falsified. Again, I still think there's some legitimacy there, but the whole narrative with the dinosaurs.
There are lies, but at the same time, I do believe that as far as the whole dinosaur thing, I'm not going to say it never existed, because you know what, there is the possibility, because we haven't. Because the thing is, there are people who have found what's it called, like fossilized footprints of a lizard-like footprint next to a human.
Next to humans, I know.
And the human footprint is much bigger than an average human foot in today's society, right? So all of those things, but those are things that you will not find in museums. They will never share those things. They will tell you, oh no, those are things that happened billions of years before humans.
No, exactly. And they can continue with this narrative that, we're millions of years old, dinosaurs existed, millions of years before man, discrediting the Bible, trying to attack that. But again, they're doing the same thing when it comes into these rock layers and things that we're seeing all around the world, the same narrative, the same story, millions of years, this is what happened. Well, again, like that whole, there's no forest on flat Earth came out, and he's kind of looking at the nonsense of scientism and these theories, he's taking kind of a different approach, with the fact that there was these other civilizations that had massive trees and they were, mining the whole earth and cutting down trees, right? But again, there is some truth into it. I mean, I don't think that people were mining all around the world.
No, I don't think so.
The fact is, were there big trees? Were there things that were larger than life? Yes, absolutely. Back then there were. I just think a lot of the stuff is right in front of us when it comes to why are things formed like that? No, we don't believe the narrative, what scientism is telling us. Well, then why don't we believe what the Bible says? What does the Bible say? There was a worldwide flood. What would that do to mountains and hills and seas and valleys? And all I'm saying is we need to kind of look into it as that angle, right? Because so many people are getting caught up with this. And I really think that, going into the Avatar land where it's like, okay, you're going to think of all these giants. And I mean, we're not talking.
That's actually what I thought about it. I was thinking about Avatar, the movie. Everything
exactly. Right? And again, you know how Hollywood likes to throw truth in plain sight sometimes, right?
Yeah.
So I agree with the fact that there's giants. And I also agree with the fact that, they might be cutting down trees and stuff. Well, I'm not debating that. What I'm debating more with that whole documentary was the fact that they have all this equipment and they're mining the whole earth. You know what I mean? And that is how we see what we see. I think those things can be explained through the global flood. But I do agree that there's evidences there that there were giants. I mean, they found some amazingly huge, skeletons of giants. And the Smithsonian, they've tried to hide it, and again, scientism is always trying to hide all the facts because, what would they say if there were giants? They couldn't, they would
that goes away their whole evolutionary nonsense, right?
Exactly. Well, where would they come from? And then why would
you know what I noticed too? It's pretty interesting that, they try to jump ahead of the bandwagon before anybody asks questions. Mm-hmm. So they'll go and then they'll pull out the facts, hide it, twist it, and tell it to the people before the people discover it.
Yeah.
Right. That's what they like to do, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
And it's a very clever way, but it's very deceptive. But that's how they roll, right? This is how the scientific community or scientism is pretty much bringing all this nonsense to us, right?
Yeah.
They want to beat us to it, just like Neil deGrasse Tyson. He beat us to it by going to say, the Earth is pear-shaped because the circumference increases below the equator.
Yeah.
Because he knows what would happen if other people beat them to it.
Yeah.
Right?
That's true. That's true. That's a good point, right? Just nonstop lies, right? But I just, like I said, while it was a really profound video, that's why I wanted you to watch it and then us to discuss it. Because, again, while there's some truths in there, I think that, a lot of the stuff that lines up there is to account for a worldwide flood, like the Bible tells us, right? And I think sediment layers, things that formed, mountains, even sea levels, all these sort of things I think can be ascribed, and it gives the Bible the glory. It gives God the glory based on the fact that he's telling the story on, what he described through the Bible, right? We don't have to get into theories outside of it. Like I would say that if the earth was being mined, by giants all over the earth, and that was pretty significant. I mean, it would be mentioned in the Bible, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. It definitely. I think there would be some historical account to it, because pretty much the Bible does mention a lot of things there, right? It gives a lot of things. Mm-hmm. And so, like with that guy's video, his documentary, it's kind of like he puts all the attention goes to it's man is the one who does this, right? Yeah. And so now, while I agreed with him with that the earth was covered with green vegetation and there were huge trees at the time, then I agree with that aspect there. But as soon as he mentioned that it's man who's doing that and going all the way to Antarctica, showing all that, and that's when I'm like, that's where I'm kind of iffy about that. I'm like,
when you get into some of the dimensions, like some of the trees he was saying were 6 miles high.
There's no possible way that the humans could have attempted to go and chop all those off. Right?
Yeah, but even just the logistics, I agree with you that there were larger animals, there were larger vegetation, trees, all that. Yeah. But when you get into a 6,000 mile tree,
that's deadly. There's no way. Yeah.
Cosmology, even if you're talking flat Earth, it doesn't matter. You're talking, really, really massive, right? And I'm saying anything that's mentioned in the Bible, what I know is there's one reference to one of the largest trees in the Bible, which is a Lebanon cedar. right?
Okay.
And it talks about that animal, which I think is referring to a dinosaur, says its tail is like a Lebanon cedar. Well, if you look at a Lebanon cedar, it's a massive, massive tree. This is going back into Job, right?
Yes.
Or Isaiah. This is old stuff. So to sit there and start kind of talking about, well, there was a race of giants well before even the Bible days. Now you're going to be getting into some heretical type teaching, because now you're going before, Adam and Eve, right? You're going that there was a whole civilization, then God wiped that out, and started that whole new one with Adam and Eve or whatever. So I think there's big problems there, because again, nothing is mentioned to that caliber. The only thing that's mentioned to that caliber, though, was the vision in Daniel of the tree. That was so large that it could see by every end of the earth, right?
Yeah.
I think that one, that's an interesting verse. Again, it's a vision, but I still think that it accounts for the fact that, wait a minute, if there was a tree that was that large, it's basically saying in the Bible that it could be seen by everyone on earth, meaning we can't be on a spinning ball, right? How does that work, right? If everyone can see, a massive tree, right? If you were on a ball, the same way with when Christ comes, that every eye will see him.
All of this, hard. All of these just intrigue my mind to the point where it's like, I want to do whatever I can to enter the kingdom of heaven, and I want to see how did God, like, how are the real, like, for example, when we drink fresh water, man, like water that's well filtered, we are like, wow, this is the best water ever. Now we think that we're drinking the real thing. Wait till we get to heaven, and we actually try drinking the water, like the divine water itself that angels drink from. What are we gonna think then, right? It's like everything that we see now. It's pretty much like, I believe it's, for lack of better words, I'll just say it's more like an illusion of the real thing. Right?
Correct. It's just it's just a graph of how, are the colors that we see, like they say, well, we only see a small percentage of the spectrum, of the full spectrum. Like someone said this one time, the stuff that we see, if you were to stretch a movie tape from like LA to Florida, right? Yeah. In the middle of like Texas somewhere, in a little wee, I don't know, maybe about 10 feet is what we see. But they say the spectrum of what, the human eye is capable of or whatever, right, is unbelievable, right? Same thing with hearing. Same thing with all of our senses. But I've heard things explained where, can you imagine being able to taste color? Can you imagine being able to, like, think of crossing your senses, being able to taste color, or smell, like, that's the amazing thing. I think that it's going to be something so profound that we can't even comprehend with our five senses, because we only think linear in the sense of we use each one. But what if you can start blending each of those?
Well, that's the thing. Like, when I
see music, like seeing music. Can you imagine being able to see music?
Yeah.
Like,
see, one of those things. It's one of those things that, when I think about it, when God created men, like he created men in his own image, right? And that man was to have dominion over all the earth and over the animals and everything, correct?
Correct.
Now, while we were made to have dominion over these, I believe, and I still say, and I stand on this belief that I believe that when God created Adam and Eve, when he created men on this earth, we had the exact same sight as the angels might have had, and we were except the only thing is, of course, we were designed to look in the image of God. I believe that the eyesight that we had before sin entered the world, we could see, like man could be able to see the different spectrums of light. Mm-hmm. And the senses of what men could be able to sense and see, because then people like Adam and Eve, they could be able to see the angels, and they could see, basically they can see everything, right? Yeah. Both visible and invisible. Until sin entered into the world, then pretty much all the glory that God gave to man was withdrawn away from us, and we were born blinded, right? And so I believe that all that which man had at the beginning will be restored, including our visions and our sight. We could be able to see things that we cannot be able to see. Sound, we can only see sound. Let's say, like, you can see sound when a plane is moving at Mach 1. You can be able to see that sound manifest through in the form of like clouds and stuff, right? All of those things we could be able to like see a lot of it. But that's just my own opinion. But I believe that this is something that, and that's why it's like I have to do whatever I can to make it,
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, obviously, like we got the way, the truth, and the life, right? I mean, Jesus, it's the only way, and I said He's provided the way. So it's going to be amazing. I mean, all these questions are just things, the stuff that we're going to see and experience, and just know everything. I mean, it's always fascinating looking into things and trying to get a better understanding. But we never will fully understand everything completely until we are in heaven and we basically can understand everything. But to me, it is fascinating. I just want to keep everything, true to the Bible, and then all of a sudden, everyone's getting caught up like crazy with this, right? Rightfully so. It's really profound. And I say if a person's really not super grounded, in the Bible, they can be caught up, and all of a sudden now they're starting to believe in these race giants that are all mining the earth, and you know what I mean, cutting down these massive trees all over the earth and stuff like that. So I think there's elements.
This goes to show that anybody can mislead people now. People are looking for people to follow. People are looking.
That's the thing. That's what I love about when I say it. It's like, look, don't even follow me or follow controversy. It's like follow the Lord Jesus, right? Follow the Bible. And again, you don't have to listen to anyone. Anyone can come up with something. You can test everything against the Bible. Like again, that's the authority of all things. So it's not about what I say or you say or somebody else says. We can always look back and we can test it by the Word of God.
Exactly.
And make sure. So, I mean, and that to me is a very loving God that would provide something, whether you want to, read in it or not. The fact is it's there to keep you safe. It's a safeguard. That it's one trusted source because people, and people have range of emotions. I mean, who knows the stuff that you're going through, or one day you're sad, one day you're happy. I mean, you're going to reflect and you're going to come up with things depending on, because we're only human, right? So need something that's divine to rest our authority in. So, I think for anyone looking into this issue more clear, especially as Christians that are being caught up in the forest, there's no forest on flat Earth. I think going to the Bible and asking questions and seeking the Lord on it, getting all understanding, right?
Yeah.
That's cool. But no, I appreciate it, man. Appreciate the talk.